All right. Welcome to United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey. We're back once again on site in Hope, New Jersey, in Jenny Jump State Park here. Unfortunately, we do have a line of thunderstorms rolling in, so we are indoors today because we do not feel like getting electrocuted is a good solution to any problem that we have, despite the intrusive thoughts otherwise. That being said, because I believe I heard some cars outside rolling in, so we'll give them a couple minutes to get in. I do want to welcome you guys in. We do live stream these on YouTube and Twitch. So if you are joining us in the online chat, do hit those like and subscribe buttons. They are, or follow buttons, depending on where you are. Completely free action that lets us know we're doing a good job and also helps support the channel. Uh, in addition, you can check us out on our website, uacnj.org. It's where you're going to find a list of all our upcoming presentations, presentations we've had in the past, as well as a link to our YouTube where we do keep those past live stream presentations for you. So if you look at the list and go, man, I missed that last talk on astrophotography, you can always go back and actually watch that. And any questions you might have, hit those up in the comments. You can also check us out on our social media pages. We have Facebook, Instagram, we have a Discord channel. You can always ask your questions there. And we do try and post any upcoming special events or what our talks are coming up there as well. So, for the people here, since we're inside, normally I point out where the restroom is, but it's outside and you cannot see through walls. I don't think any of you have the Superman X-ray vision. I don't expect you to. However, if you need to use a bathroom, it is the porta potty outside. It is illuminated by red, so it's easy to find in the night. You already walked through the little museum area and gift shop on your way to this inside lecture area. So feel free to check that out. I will be manning that after the presentation because, again, they don't give me the power to be in two places at once, despite all my years of retail training. When we go to leave, we do use our headlights. We do not like getting run over. We do not like seeing people get run over. Too much blood. And although we have rain, let's avoid that amount of cleanup. That being said, any flashlights we're using to walk around, do keep those pointed towards the ground because we don't need to unnecessarily blind people. We do not need surprise rave. It becomes dangerous. You also lose all your night vision when that happens, and that's annoying. All right. So, for the people here, our talk tonight is visual astronomy. What's up there and how do I find it? with Michael Spoleti. Mike Spoleti is a 28-year-old general contractor from Cliffside Park, New Jersey. He was introduced to UACNJ after becoming a member of the New York City Club, AAA. I wish I remembered what the actual name of that is instead of just blah 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 blah. Amateur Astronomers Association of New York. Sometimes it's hard with the acronyms, especially the alliteration. He was looking for a dark location where he could observe from, and after attending a public night 2 years ago, we chained him up in the basement and he hasn't left. No, that
Help me.
we didn't go quite that far. But he got hooked. He decided to become a member in order to learn more information about astronomy. With much guidance from other members, he now does both visual observing and astrophotography. When he's not spending his time under the stars, he's also an avid rock climber and has traveled to places like California in order to climb. Hopefully, he's an example of how someone who lives in an urban area and has no formal science or astronomy background can also enjoy the hobby.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I see some familiar faces out there, and I see some new people, so welcome. This is my first talk here, so take it easy on me, you know. If you like the talk, write a good review on my Yelp. So, so This talk is going to be about visual astronomy, what's up there, and how do I find it. Um, I think when I was sourcing inspiration for this talk, it came out of a lot of struggles and mistakes that I made at the beginning. So hopefully there's a lot of lessons in here for people who are interested in the hobby to not do what I do in the beginning. So I hope you guys enjoy. Who am I? So, like Kim said, I've been a member here for about 2 years. I enjoy both visual and astrophotography, and we'll kind of learn a little bit what that means over the course of the night. I work in real estate. I'm a general contractor, and I think this is a great way to be able to be out and enjoy nature. Who am I not? So I think this is one of the most important tidbits of information I'm going to give you. I'm not an expert in astronomy. Um, I have no formal science background. I didn't go to school for astronomy. I work in real estate. I'm not a billionaire. I think a lot of times when people are getting into this hobby, they think they need a lot of money to get into it. I'm just some guy who bought a telescope one day, and now here I am. Who are you? So hopefully you guys are interested in learning about the hobby. Um, might be a little bit cloudy tonight, so I don't know how much we're gonna see, but I have a little activity for that. Maybe we'll get to do something cool. And I hope you guys are pretty cool. So strap in and enjoy the next hour of my talk. So how did I get started? So like I talked about in the beginning, I think a lot of this talk, a lot of the inspiration for this talk was a lot of the mistakes I made. So how did I get into astronomy? My beautiful fiance Caroline is here. We moved into a new apartment a few years ago, and the cool thing about this apartment was that there was a balcony and it had amazing view of the sky. One of her friends was giving away a telescope, and I said, I don't want the used telescope. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna get my own telescope, right? So I got this little guy. This is a 90 millimeter Mac, and we'll kind of talk about what that means, sort of over the talk. I always had a fascination with the universe. Always had a fascination with the sky. I always, had preconceived notions of when I looked into a telescope what I was gonna see. So I remember I was watching on the news, and Sam Champion was on there on Channel 7, and he was talking about the parade of planets. So on this night, the parade of planets, you could go outside, and it was late, and you could see, all of the visual planets kind of lined up in a row in one night. So I said, I'm gonna try this. So I set my alarm for 4 in the morning. I got up super early. I set up this little telescope on my balcony, and I had an idea of what I was gonna see that night. And this was kind of my idea of what I was gonna see. I was gonna look into my telescope, and I was gonna see this image of the planets, image of Saturn. Um, this is what I saw. So I was blown away the first time I saw Saturn. One of the coolest things I think you can see inside a telescope or while using a telescope is Saturn. But I think there's a lot of preconceived notions, and there's some expectations that you have to go in through visual astronomy. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Um, After I had this night of the parade of planets, another thing I'll talk about is I wanted to see more things that were up there. I've heard, and I was online and I was searching. You could see galaxies, you can see star clusters, you can see all this stuff, and I really wanted to get a lot of that from my balcony. And so I set up my telescope. I had the star atlases. I pointed the telescope in the right direction, and over the course of a couple nights, I started to get frustrated. Um, I was pointing the telescope what I thought was in the right direction, but maybe it wasn't. I knew I kind of found what I was looking for. The object that I was looking for was a very, very bright globular cluster. It's M13. It's supposed to be one of the magnificent things you can see in the northern hemisphere sky. And I was kind of seeing this fuzzy patch of gray, and it wasn't really doing it for me. So I was kind of disappointed, spent a little bit of money on this telescope, and I wanted to get more information as to why, this wasn't working out. So kind of, we have an audience here. Do you guys see any problems with this picture for me trying to observe? Yes, lady? Yeah. So I live in the worst place I think in the entire world to get into astronomy. I live right outside New York City. So light, it's what we call a border light. It's probably the worst conditions you can have in terms of light. And what I was looking for was a deep sky object. It was something that wasn't necessarily too dim in the sky, but I couldn't see it. Any other sort of Comments about this setup that I have? Any things that you see? Yes. So he actually points out a very good point. When we talk about light pollution, and I'll kind of go over it in a future slide, we also talk about local light pollution. One of our members, I was having a conversation before, Mike, he said, I live in this dark place, but all the outside lights are on. My neighbors have their lights on, the dogs are barking. So this all comes into play when you do astrophotography, but when you want to do visual too, it makes a huge difference. So I'm going to go over a little kind of shortcomings that I have here. Um, One of the things that wasn't that great about this is I could only see a specific section of the sky. There's buildings everywhere. I kind of live in an urban place. My balcony is very small, so even though this is a very small setup, it was difficult to get in there and move my stuff around. When I always thought of stargazing, I pictured these guys like Charles Messier or whoever, Galileo. They were looking in their telescope and they were just at peace. And it was, the middle of the night. I was in a city, people were screaming. It wasn't the cerebral experience that I kind of thought about that. I think eventually my neighbors were going to call the police on me. People go on their balcony and they have binoculars and they have the telescope. It's not the most ideal place to sort of observe. So I'm talking about a lot of negatives of this. There were actually some very good positives, and we'll kind of get into this sort of maybe if you're going to do some visual astronomy in the city through this telescope, which it's a 90 millimeter Mac. I really had, I'm not going to, I had a really nice view of the planet. Saturn looked amazing. The moon is something that's very bright, and you can see it anywhere. And light pollution isn't that big of a deal. So I was able to get some really good observing of the moon from this location. So it wasn't all bad. Um, so how are we going to spend our evening together? First, we're going to talk about what is visual astronomy. I think a good way to do that is to talk about what visual astronomy isn't. Um, what can be seen in the night sky? How do we find what we're looking for? I think one of the coolest parts about buying a telescope and something that I still enjoy is finding stuff. The sky is big. How do we know where to point this fancy, telescope that we bought? And maybe some tips for, folks who want to get more into the hobby. Um, so what is visual astronomy? This was the hardest slide for me to write for the whole presentation. I couldn't come up with a very good definition of visual astronomy, and I think it could be confusing for someone who's not in the hobby. So in order to define visual astronomy, I want to talk about astrophotography first. So I see a lot of people in this room that engage in astrophotography, and yeah, what you guys kind of see on TV, these images of the James Webb Telescope, and you see these beautiful images. Those are actually pictures, right? A lot of what you go on, you see on Instagram, and you see these beautiful galaxies. People have actually come out and they're using photography to tease out detail in the night sky. Because the camera can capture images and computers can process the data, we get really detailed pictures. As I kind of illustrated in the previous slide, people have these expectations of what you're going to see through a telescope, and it could be a little bit different. Even though photography, changed the way that even professionals and scientists really go about, observing and coming up with new observations, a lot of people still rely on visual. Um, we talk about something like a variable star. There's a huge group of amateurs who are, doing good work in astronomy, just with their eyes and in their backyards. So what is visual astronomy? Visual astronomy involves witnessing, observing astrophenomenon with the naked eye or through an optical device like a telescope. I stole that right off the High Point Scientific website, so you guys can read more about that if you're interested. Even though we use technology in the when we're observing and when we're doing visual astronomy, the method which we're using to see these objects is through our own eye, and I think that's pretty cool. So here's another example. So to the right was a photo or an image that I've taken from Astro Backyard, which is a very popular astrophotographer on if you go on YouTube, he has a lot of videos. So that's something that you would see through astrophotography, right? That's something you would see through a camera. On the other side is actually a sketch. So someone, actually sketched what they saw. On the left-hand side is a sketch of what you would see at the telescope, and that's, the Orion Nebula. That's M42, and that's kind of like this breathtaking object that the first time you see it, it's very bright in the sky. From most places, you can see it in the naked eye. The next slide. So this is a shameful plug. I took this picture. I took this picture from this location. And what we're looking at is the North American Nebula. So one of the reasons why the colors look so detailed and it looks so detailed is, when I took this picture, I gathered 3 hours of data. So I had a camera. It was moving with the night sky, and the camera was capturing all these photons for 3 hours, right? So kind of think about that in terms of like your human eye. So the aperture of my lens, I was just using a regular camera lens, was 135 millimeters. So that's 22 times bigger than the active region in the human retina that kind of can process imaging. So why is this important? What we call aperture, right, that 135 millimeters, that's just able to gather so many more photons. It's something that's bigger. When you see these huge telescopes, you get so much more detail because what you're actually observing through is able to capture more light. And one of the other things that I'd like to mention is that, this image, it's processed. So you put it in a computer. There's a lot of work that the computer does in order to get these beautiful images, and the art and of actually being able to get a good astrophoto. A lot of it is working with software in order to be able to get the right coloring and then the right exposure. So I think this is a good explanation of what astrophotography is and sort of a little bit information into why it's different from visual. So what can we see up there? I don't know if any of you guys have looked through a telescope before, but this is kind of an example of what we can see in the night sky. Oh gosh. Just kidding, that's my cat. So in order to talk about what we can see, one of the ways we're going to do it is we're going to talk about how we see things in the night sky, or how we do, visual observing. Um, So the three main ways that we see things is naked eye. You can go outside, you can look up, and you can see things. You don't need a telescope. You don't need any special equipment. And I think I've had this conversation with some of the members of this club. Some of the best memories that I have is just not even looking through my telescope, just sitting outside and kind of being at awe at all the stars and stuff like that. Binoculars. I'm a really big salesperson when it comes to talking to beginners about buying a pair of binoculars, and we'll kind of explain why as we go through the talk. And the telescope, everyone has seen them. Dan Kirby, who's here tonight, gave a wonderful talk about telescopes. So if you're interested in learning more about that or purchasing a telescope, you could definitely check that out, or definitely ask him a couple questions. So, so naked eye observing. Just kind of going out to the group here. What are some of the things that you guys think, or have seen, like, just with your naked eye, just going outside? And I kind of have a big hint in the photo. Anything? Clouds, okay, yeah. Eclipses, constellations. You could kind of see it. I kind of didn't blur it out completely. Um, So meteors. So I really wanted to talk about this really fun example. So I have my two sisters here. We're Italian, and we would go to Italy during the summer. And there's this holiday in Italy called the Feast of Saint Lawrence, Festa di San Lorenzo, which is a feast in Italy. And how they describe the feast is they say il notte quando la stelle cadi, which literally translates to the night the star falls. And I never understood what that means until I came to this club. It's actually in the middle of August, and it coincides with a very famous meteor shower. So the Italians, when they came up with this holiday, I don't think they knew what was going on. So like, oh my God, it has to be this, godlike thing that's happening. Meteor showers are cool to see. One of the other things is satellites. You can come here on a dark night, and you can see these kind of things zipping across. Aurora. We just had an instance where the Northern Lights could be seen. I heard you could see it from New Jersey. I didn't see anything. But that would have been cool. The eclipse, obviously, the eclipse just happened. And UFOs. So, any questions? Okay.
So we do questions at the end, Mike. So
I know, I know. Binoculars. So when I was starting out, I think the one thing, whenever I'm here, I get the question, I want to buy a telescope. I want to get involved in this hobby. How do I do it? My answer to them is always buy a set of binoculars. I think I did it after I bought my telescope, and I wish it was the reverse, especially when you're getting into visual. I'll talk a little bit about why I like binoculars. Whenever I observe or when I'm doing visual stuff and I want to come out here, I always have a set of binoculars. They don't have to be expensive, but I always have a set of binoculars next to me to kind of help me and guide me through the night sky. Um, why are binoculars nice? So binoculars are a really low cost entry point into visual astronomy, or observing. You could buy a really, really nice set of binoculars for $100, even $50. Um, there's little to no setup. Um, you know, tonight you might be able to see some telescopes, you might not because of the weather, but some of them are massive. And for a beginner, you don't want something that's gonna be a pain to set up. You really want to get out there. I know Dan's sitting right in front of me, and in his talk last week, he said, the best telescope is the one you use. And I find myself always using my binoculars. They're simple to use. We're going to talk a little bit about star hopping. My talk has said what's up there, but how to find it. When you usually deal with binoculars, typically they have a very, very wild field of view. So you can see things that are very big, and it makes it a little bit easier for you to find stuff up there. One of the things that I kind of was going through this talk and didn't really think about is that when you use a telescope, you're only looking through one eye, and it can, unless you have a binaviewer, but binoculars are really, they're almost natural to people because you want to look with both eyes. And again, it's a great way to get introduced to this, with not having to spend a lot of money and jump right into a telescope. To the right, you have some of the objects that you can really see, beautifully through binoculars. I would argue that there are certain objects in the night sky that look better through binoculars. When I'm going out there and I want to see the Pleiades, which is a very big star cluster, the telescopes that I have, it's too narrow. You don't get the whole, the star cluster. So having a pair of binoculars are really nice. You can see the moon. The ones that I have doesn't have too much magnification, so you don't get a lot of detail, but it's something that looks nice. And I use my binoculars during the day. I go on hikes. I'll pull up my binoculars. They have a lot of uses for them. So if you guys are thinking about going out and buying a telescope, maybe consider a pair of binoculars as well. Um, Telescopes. So now that I've tried to sell you on binoculars, I'm going to tell you that I love looking through telescopes. I think some of the best moments that I've had outside and doing this hobby isn't looking through a camera or setting up my astrophotography equipment. It's actually, sitting out here with my Dobsonian telescope and just scanning the sky and kind of seeing what's up there. Not to scare anyone. Again, I mentioned that there was a really good talk last week about if you're looking to purchase a telescope, which ones to buy. They can be a costly entry point into the hobby. If you're going out and you see on Amazon, oh, there's this telescope that's for $100, and it's gonna be 70x magnification, and I'm gonna be able to see the flag on the moon. That it's not happening. I would say, in my own opinion, again, none of this is just my own opinion. I'm no expert. I think the good telescope start about $300, maybe $400. They can be difficult to set up and operate. So I have an 8-inch Dobsonian. I was gonna bring it today, but we're inside, so I would have had nowhere to put it. My Dobsonian is probably about 40 pounds. I live in an apartment. Every time I want to observe anything, I have to carry it into the stairway. I gotta walk down the stairs. I have an elevator, but I gotta load it up into my car. It can be frustrating to handle and move this thing. I, I don't think it's that big that it's preventing me from coming here, But if I know the night's not going to be 100%, sometimes I might say to myself, I don't want to move the thing. I just want to leave it in the storage unit and not do anything. Like I mentioned, some of my greatest astronomy moments have been looking through a telescope. There's certain objects in the night sky where, the photos are nice, but it just like looking through it in a telescope, it just doesn't do it justice. There's certain details of the moon and planets that you're not going to get with the binoculars. When I look through my binoculars, because they don't have tons of magnification, you could tell that Jupiter's there. You could see little points of light, and that's about it. If you really want to get any detail further than that, you have to go through a telescope, or you should go through a telescope. Um, and then, if you wish to see a lot of deep sky objects, this is where we're going to talk about. And one of the reasons, or one of the things I wanted to steer away from with this talk, is to talk about gear, things to buy. I don't want to confuse anyone. But when we talk about deep sky objects, one of the things that becomes important is aperture. The size of the object that's collecting the light. So if you really want to start viewing some of these deep sky objects, you're going to have to get a bigger scope, and that can be burdensome for some people. Um, yeah. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is, what are the types of things that you can see with a telescope? In my mind, maybe someone would think of this otherwise, but there's two main categories of things you could see, right? The first category is what I'm going to say, or what I'm going to call lunar and planetary observing, and it's exactly what you think it is. You're observing the moon and you're observing the planets. I think I'll go over some of the benefits and the cool things that you can, get introduced through this type of observing. And then we'll talk about, other things that you could see in the night sky. So the cool thing about the moon and the planets is they're really easy to find. I've come out here a couple nights, and I've tried to find certain objects in the night sky, and sometimes it can be difficult. The moon is huge. It's very bright. Everyone knows where it is, and it's oftentimes the first thing that when people buy a telescope, they look through because it's easy to find. Um, Other things that are easy to find are planets. Um, Planets can be found on what we call the ecliptic. So they kind of follow this plane that kind of cuts the sky in half. You could always point your telescope in that general direction. If there's something bright there, chances are it's one of the planets that we can see. Um, One of the things, and this might be not the most scientific way to put this, but they're always changing. So if you come back here tonight on the exact same night next year, chances are, no, 100%, the night's gonna look the same. The stars will be in the same place. All the galaxy and the nebula will be in the same place, but the planets, light pollution will be worse. But the planets, they actually change positions, so there's different times of years that aren't necessarily constant, where you can see different planets at different times of night. One of the things that I always find cool, and I don't have too much information as to why, but over time, we're talking years here. Saturn will actually start to rotate. So when you look through a telescope, you could actually see the rings of Saturn. You could see it kind of tilts in different ways, which is kind of cool. Different positions of Jupiter's moons. So with a telescope, with a reasonable telescope that you would buy, you could see 4 of Jupiter's moons, and they're constantly changing. Sometimes the moons are cutting across Jupiter. Sometimes Jupiter's blocking the moon. But they're always in different locations. One of the great things about lunar and planetary observing is something that I talked about on my balcony, and why I said that my balcony was a great place to be able to view this is you actually don't need a ginormous or a big aperture telescope to be able to look at some of these things. My 90 millimeter Mac, that doesn't get used as often, but I always bring it out, on a nice night. I can hold it in my hand. I could put it on a little table. It's very easy for me to set up. So a lot of the times I feel like I'm observing the moon and the planets more, because it's less of a burden to take these things out. The one thing that I would say about the lunar and the planetary observing is that when we compare it to deep sky objects, which we're going to talk about next, there's not as many things as you can see. There's only a few planets that really look nice, or you can even see it in the telescope, and there's even fewer that you can actually tease out detail. People always ask me, what's the coolest thing you've ever seen in a telescope? I still say it's Saturn. Saturn looks awesome. You can see its rings. it almost looks like a little cartoon in the eyepiece. I wish it was a little bit clearer today, and maybe we could have taken a look, but I think it's cloudy outside. Deep sky objects. So, what are deep sky objects? Without getting too technical or in detail, what these like things comprise of. When we talk about deep sky objects, we talk about galaxies, we talk about star clusters, we talk about nebulas. One of the things that I have on this slide, which is just because I don't think I had a very good category for them, would be stars. There's different types of things you can see in terms of stars. For example, one of my favorite things to view is double stars, right? The reason why I included it in deep sky objects is I feel that you really need a bigger telescope or a bigger aperture telescope to split some of the small ones. But I really didn't have a good idea of where to put these things, so I included stars in here. If we want to see galaxies, what do we need to the conditions to be like in order to see them? When we talk about deep sky objects, conditions really have to be right. And in the slides that are coming up, we'll talk about a little bit more of what that means. These can be difficult to find. Some of these things, I've heard them described as it looks like someone sneezed on the eyepiece. Some of them are just wispy little gray blobs that, like, if you didn't know they were there, you wouldn't think anything of it. Some of them can be difficult. I've definitely sat here and been frustrated with trying to find some of the objects that can be a little bit dim. Aperture and gear becomes a lot more important. So we have this kind of saying of in astronomy, we call it aperture fever. I bought an 8-inch telescope. I want to see more stuff. Now I want the 10-inch telescope so I could see something more, and or the 12-inch or the 20-inch. So unfortunately, as the size of the scope gets bigger, so does the bill, and so does my frustration that my fiance has on me, because every time she sees the Celestron box, she gets nervous. So, um, and there's an infinite list of objects that we can look at. There's an infinite amount of galaxies. There's an infinite amount of star clusters. We might need a telescope that's the size of planet Earth, to see it. But there's an infinite amount of stuff out there. One of the reasons that I got into this, and one of the things that I liked about observing through a telescope, is it could actually be a challenge. There's certain ways that we'll talk about that. How do we find these things up there? There's certain technology, but we'll talk about one of the things that I like to do, which I don't see a lot of people doing, which is star hopping. You have a telescope, you point at a bright star, and you kind of try to hop around the night sky to try to find what you're looking for. And like I said, to the right is the Andromeda Galaxy. That's kind of what you're going to look at when you see the Andromeda Galaxy through an eyepiece. That's probably one of the brighter things you can see in an eyepiece, and it's still kind of wispy. You would kind of miss it. So some of these things could be really dim. Um, that's the sky objects. How do we find what we were looking for? I'm kind of weird. I think when, like anything in life, when you want to have a successful night of observing, it kind of starts during the day. There's certain things that you can do during the day that's going to make your life easier when you come out here and more enjoyable. When I first started out a couple years ago, one of the things that I would bring with me was I would bring a simple list, and there would just be targets that I wanted to try to find in the night sky. Maybe that night my big target was I really want to see if I can find the Orion Nebula by myself, and I would kind of sit there and star hop through. How do we find a lot of these targets, or a lot of the cool things where there's tons of literature and there's tons of books that we can look through in order to get an idea of not only what they look like but where to find them. I have a star atlas. I use it all the time when I'm out. This is just much like a regular atlas. It's just a mass of stars that you can look through and see where different objects are positioned in the night sky. They have online versions, so you can go on your computer and you can flip through different times, and you can see what's up that night. One of my favorite books that I still always carry with me when I go out is Turn Left at Orion. There's a sample of it on the right hand side on the screen. They're not paying me to say this, I just like the book. What's cool about this book is that not only does it give you a little blurb of kind of what the object is, it has little pictures of what it looks like in the telescope, which makes it super helpful for finding stuff. It also has this really cool rating scale, and it does it by different instruments. So if you look on the, if you look on the book, this is M13. I think I mentioned this before. M13 got 4 telescopes. So wow, this must be an object that I have to see tonight. And I really, really like this book. There's different catalogs that when us astronomers or people who get into the hobby, they always discuss. You hear sometimes, I refer to this object, this globular crystal, as M13. M refers to a gentleman named Charles Messier. Charles Messier, in his observatory, I even heard it was in his apartment. He was in Paris. He was in Paris, and he, at the time, the way you made a name for yourself in the hobby was you named a comet after yourself. That was, if you did that, you were gonna get paid. So he was trying to do that. So as he was in Paris trying to find these comets, he came across these little fuzzy things. So he made a catalog of things that weren't comets. So if you ever got up there and he said, okay, that's not a comet, I know that, I didn't hit the lottery. Funny enough, we use this catalog as things we can see in the night sky. A lot of, people in the hobby use it. There's a fun thing that people do. I've never done it. Dan, have you ever tried this? You you can do a Messier marathon where you try to see every one of these objects in one night. You have to do it in the spring because that's the only time you can possibly do it. I think maybe in one night I've picked off like 15 or 16 of these things, but to get there's over 100 of them. I think it's like 110, 114, maybe more than that. It's difficult. Where was I going with this? Before you go out, make a list of what you want to see. The worst thing when you get out here is you have all your stuff set up and you're just kind of lost in the night sky. The night sky is a big place. When you look up, you might not know where to point the telescope. Make sure you have the right equipment for the job. So if you ask any person in this hobby, there's a night where the skies are beautiful. The wind was crisp. They were so excited to come out here and observe. They got here, they opened their truck, and they're like, I forgot something. um, if you're in imaging, it's happened before. The cool thing about here is maybe someone has the piece that you're looking for. I came out here one night with my Dob and I forgot the whole base of the Dobsonian, so that wasn't gonna work. So make sure before you drive to wherever you need to go, you have all the stuff that you need. Um, Location, location, location. This is the first question that I pose to everyone. Location matters when we're talking about observing, and we'll kind of go into why. Observing site. So when I started the presentation, you saw my balcony. We talked about some of the reasons why the balcony wasn't the best place to observe from. This page is taken from a book. The book is called The Backyard Astronomer's Guide, or I think that's what it's called. Um, and they kind of give like a little criteria or sort of checklist, a point system, if you will, to judge whether your viewing site is is um is good. So the one that everyone mentioned in the beginning, general light pollution, we use a scale. Don't have to go too technical. There's a scale called the Bortle scale that measures light pollution. Where I live right outside New York City. It's a Bortle 8. You can't see anything. When you come out here, I believe out here is close to a Bortle 4. But the light is no good when we're talking about visual and astrophotography. So if you have good general light pollution, you get 10 points. So local light pollution. I'll never forget this moment. Me and my fiance, when we were getting into the hobby, I wanted to go up to Bear Mountain State Park. Um, the Bortle scale is favorable there. It's a little bit better than being, in the middle of New York City. So we go up. It's dust time. We have all of our stuff. I have my telescope. It's just getting dark, and I was like, yes, I'm finally gonna see some of the cool stuff that I read about in a book. All of a sudden, wherever we were sitting in the field, the stadium lights turned on. It was the middle. It was the middle of the day, and I was bummed out. Local light pollution matters. Like I mentioned today, you could be in the darkest. You can be in Antarctica, but if your neighbor has huge stadium lights set up, it's not going to do any good. So you want to be mindful of that. Horizon. I think one of the advantages of where you're standing right now is you have a really big horizon. You know, you can see a lot. When I'm on my balcony, I get the south, a little bit of the north, and that's really it. So I can't see anything behind me. So you really want, you know, a clear vantage point if you can of the sky. You know, we talk about some people do this from their backyard, even, you know, do some photography, and they're kind of fighting through trees when they want to see stuff, especially when they're doing photography. Convenience, full marks if you converve in the comfort of your own yard. I wish I lived somewhere that was dark. I don't, so I have to drive in order to get it, but I'm happy to do so. Um, Ground level. I have to take all of my stuff from my third floor apartment downstairs. I don't like doing it. It's not very nice. You know, all that stuff is heavy. One of the things that isn't the best for me is when I'm observing on my balcony is heat. You know, heat will rise off the balcony, and that will affect actually the telescope. Amenities. Score 5 for a bathroom. You know, what's good about this place where we're standing is, you know, it could be a really cold night, and you're doing some observing, you're doing some astrophotography. You know, I always joke, it's, you know, you come out here and half the time we're spent inside on the computer because it's cold, but it's a nice thing to be able to come inside and warm up. Privacy, we talked about, you know, you don't want to be in the middle of you want to be alone with the stars a little bit. Insects and snow. I don't think you can escape the insects here, you know. Just but um these are the things that we're looking for when we want to talk about visual astronomy. We're kind of going through this checklist, and we're trying to say, you know, is the place I'm going to, you know, fit some of these criteria? There's some, because we live in the Northeast and because we live around these big cities. A lot of the times we're traveling to go to places that are very dark. I traveled about an hour and a half today, which isn't a lot. You know, there's darker places that you can go. You can go to a place called Cherry Springs in Pennsylvania, but for me that's 4 or 5 hours. So I'm actively traveling to different places in order to get, you know, those really dark skies. So how do we find what we're looking for? I talked about, yeah, I mentioned in the beginning that I don't really want to go into gear too much, so don't kind of get bogged down in these sort of semantics. So there's different types of telescopes and there's different types of mounts, right? We have an alt as mount, which is a mount that you have your telescope on, and you can kind of just slew around, and it goes in any direction, and you can find what you're looking for that way. The Dobsonian, which is a very popular, you know, beginner telescope. I have a Dobsonian. I love my Dobsonian. Is an alt as mount. I can point in any direction. It makes it a little easier to find things. Equatorial mount. Equatorial mount. When you move it, it follows the movement of the night sky. So we use equatorial mounts a lot more when we talk about astrophotography because, you know, when we have our camera rigs, it has to move with the night sky. I can find these to be a little bit awkward. I've never actually owned a telescope or used a telescope with an equatorial mount. It's very popular in this hobby, and I see it a lot of the times when we come out here where we see what's called go-to mounts. Go-to mounts is a piece of equipment, and it's fabulous. You set it up, you have to align it in a certain way, but you can go out, you can type in a code, and it can, you know, the telescope automatically slews to an object you want to see. So it relies on the computer to do the finding of stuff. Um, I don't own a go-to mount. I own what's called a push-to mount. But I think this has its advantages. We're going to talk about star hopping in a second, which is a much, I kind of want to call it like an organic way. You're a little bit more attached to what you're looking at. You're finding it, which is a cool challenge. The Dobsonian that I have is really cool. Celestron makes a scope. Again, I'm not pushing Celestron. They make a scope that's a push-to telescope. So you actually mount your cell phone on the actual optical tube of the scope. And what's cool is it can do this thing called plate solving. So the phone knows where the telescope is pointed, and the phone has a little, you know, star map on it, and it will help you kind of guide through the night sky. I find that, you know, go to and push to very useful when I'm trying to find things that are very dim. I mentioned that some of these things, you know, you wouldn't know they're there unless someone told you. Um, so these are sort of some of the ways that, you know, how do we find what we're looking for? This is some of the technology that we use. Some of them, you know, utilizes computers. Some of them don't. So unfortunately, tonight I don't think we're gonna do too much observing. It's very cloudy. I don't know if it's raining outside. So I kind of came with a backup plan. So I came, there's a couple people in the room. I think Caroline, you wanna help me out? So we're gonna do a little activity. Carol, you want to give him a little the blank pieces of paper too?
Will this will these handouts show on your slide
Yeah, there's gonna be a
deck?
visual.
Okay.
Yeah, there's gonna for the people at home.
Mhm.
They can play along. Um, so you're holding two pieces of paper, right? I actually I'm so cool. I'm such a magician. I've actually took the whole night sky and I put it on a piece of paper for you guys. So you actually see a little image of the night sky. And then you have a blank piece of paper. So my fiance's Caroline is gonna demonstrate what we're gonna do. We're actually gonna roll it up, and this is gonna be your state of the art telescope. So shh. So, what I want everyone to do. So this is a part of the sky, right? It could be anywhere. I'm not going to tell you where it's located. If it was dark out today, and I'm sorry, if there's no clouds today, we would be able to see something that was similar to this. This would be something that would be up in the sky right now. So the image or the object that we're looking for, I keep talking about it, it's one of my favorite one, is M13. It's a globular cluster, and it's in the constellation Hercules, right? So nope, nope, don't put your telescopes down. 1 second. Um, so we got to know where this thing is. You guys don't know what you're looking for. So we're looking at a star map. We're trying to find M13, which is right here. So what I want everyone to do is kind of look on, the image here. For the people at home, you can do this, and try to just kind of get an idea of where this thing is, up here. So now, what I want you guys to do, everyone's here. I want you to take your star map and I want you to turn it upside down. Okay. So you guys have your telescopes, right? I want you to take the telescope and I want you to point it at the bottom right section of the map. Um, the bottom right section of the map, and I want you to get any point in the night sky, and without looking with what you just saw up here, try to find M13. Well, you're starting at the bottom. It's not at yeah. So okay, we got one person who think they found it. Okay, you can judge yourself. The map is over here. You'll find out. So does anyone think they've with the telescope has been able to find it? You think you're able to do it? Yeah. Okay, that's good. All right. All right. So everyone, we'll reconvene up here. So you guys just kind of had a little taste of what it's like to find stuff in the night sky. It's funny, I think it's a little bit challenging. I think Dan mentioned something that was kind of cool. When you guys took your paper, all of your telescopes are different. You have a different field of view. Some people have, really fat pieces of paper and they could see more of the night sky. And I think the people who did that, maybe it was a little bit easier. But if, you're like my sister and you did one that was very, very small, maybe it's a little bit more difficult. You can't see, a large section. So we're going to talk about star hopping. So star hopping is something really fun. I like to do star hopping. You guys just kind of did it on your little sheet of paper. What is star hopping? So star hopping is the process of hopping from one bright guide star and constellations to get to your target object. Um, I think it was kind of funny for the people who are not in the room and kind of viewing online. When I brought the map up, I saw people look at the map and they would look down and they would look at the map and they would look down and they would look at the map and they would look down and they're trying to find where they need to be. I got this from the Backyard Astronomer's Guide, and I think it's a really good quote. The trick is transferring the mental picture of the route of the sky that you're going to take, and you have to be familiar with that in order to find what you're looking for. And I find me doing this when I'm out. I'm looking at a star map, and I'm trying to remember where everything is when I look at the picture. And when I get to my scope, all I see is this black void in the eyepiece. And I think you guys just got a little taste of that. When I talked about binoculars, imagine, when if you have a set of binoculars, imagine being able to see half that piece of paper with both of your eyes. Maybe it would have been a little bit easier for you guys to find, what you're looking for. One of the things I asked you guys to do was to flip the image upside down. And when I use my Dobsonian, not only is the image upside down vertically and horizontal, it's actually upside down or switched left to right or backwards left to right. So as you're navigating through the night side, what you're seeing can be a little disorienting. So what do we do when we talk about star hopping? I'll kind of take you through a little bit of a star hop on the next page. When we have our telescope, I don't want to talk too much about gear. What we actually have is on the optical tube of the telescope, we'll have finder things. So I don't have my Dobsonian here, but there's actually finder aids that we can mount to the telescope, and you could see with both of your eyes, you kind of line up a little red dot in the sky, and whatever that red dot is pointing to, hopefully, you look into your telescope and that's what you see. Let's go over this. Okay. So this is the paper that you have in front of you, right? And I don't know if anyone was able to do this successfully, but M13 is kind of over here, right? So the way that I was always introduced of how to find M13 is you find two really bright stars in the sky. You're going to see Vega, which in the summer is the brightest star in the sky. And you find Arcturus, right? So I know that if you look in between them, right, you kind of have this little funky thing in the middle here. This is Hercules. So Hercules is kind of, going like this in the night sky. Dan kind of mentioned it. You find what's called the keystone. So what I do is I can see this very bright star. I can see this very bright star. I find the keystone that's in the middle of it, and what I will do is I'll pick one of these, these bright stars within the keystone, and I'll kind of scan down the section, and eventually, you'll find something that looks like a globular cluster. Here's some examples that I took from the internet of different, objects or popular star hops. That you can see in the summer, but unfortunately it's cloudy tonight. This is the Ring Nebula. My fiance always joked with me. She would say my favorite object in the sky was the Ring Nebula because I hadn't gotten her a ring at that point. So the joke would have been funnier if she didn't have it. But I find that the Ring Nebula is I'm not gonna say easy, but it's a nice object to kind of find. It's in the constellation Lyra, which is a lyre, which is a little instrument, and it's in the vicinity of some very bright stars. So this is Vega, and whenever I'm looking for the Ring Nebula, you have two stars over here, which is Gamma Lyrae and Beta Lyrae. I never know the names of them, but it's right there. And what I do to try to find the Ring Nebula is I look for these two stars, I line up my telescope, and I kind of try to shoot for right in the middle of it, and you'll kind of see something that looks like that, and you found the Ring Nebula. So I think this is an example of a star hop that isn't too difficult, and it's an object that can kind of be a little bit easier for people to see. One of my favorite, yeah. Oh yeah. Good luck looking at this with your. I did show the photograph of this. This is the North American of it. Yeah. Um. Yeah. This is a tough one. So the one I had the picture in the beginning of the North American Nebula. I don't know. I've talked to people who said they can see it. I've never been able to see it. I don't know. It has to be dark. It has to be very dark. It's also very big and very diffuse. So another one of my favorite objects to look at in the summer sky is they call it M11. They call it the wild duck cluster. People swear that they see like a gaggle of wild ducks flying in it. I think it just looks like a star cluster. It's a very beautiful star cluster. It's kind of pretty. It looks like kind of diamonds in the night sky. But when you're star hopping, it's like a crazy star hop. So you start at Altair, and you kind of have to like zoom across almost half the night sky. So this would be an example of something maybe that would be a little bit, difficult for someone. Yeah. So we're kind of getting to the point where I've talked a lot, and I want to hear from you guys. I forgot what I talked about, so let's go over it. What is visual astronomy? We talked a lot about what a visual astronomy isn't. It's visual astronomy is not looking through something with the aid of a camera. It's not astrophotography. Um, some of the challenges when observing, you saw my balcony. You guys could come over anytime for a drink, but that's not the best place where you can observe from. I wouldn't necessarily invite any of my astronomy buddies over if they wanted to do some observing. What can we see up there? We talked about different mediums that we used to observe. You can observe things with your naked eye. You can look through binoculars, or you can buy a telescope and look up. Lunar and planetary versus deep sky object. We talked about this. We talked about, some of the equipment and some of the reasons why someone would choose, lunar and planetary versus deep sky objects. I've actually seen Saturn and Jupiter in the middle of Manhattan. AAA has observing nights. You can actually go out, and there's certain spots where you can actually see, these objects. You would never think you'd be able to see it, but you can. How do we find what we're looking for with a piece of paper now? You got to be prepared in order when you come out here. Some of these places that you're going to can be remote. They can be very dark. You don't want to get out there and kind of be lost when you're up here. You want to make sure you have all the stuff that you need. The observing site becomes important when we're doing any of this stuff. We talked about some of the different telescopes and some of the different, computerized aids that if you want to get into the hobby or they kind of help make finding stuff easier. And then we all did that fun little, star hopping activity. So that was really fun. Um, I want to learn more. The best resource, this is another shameless, the best resource is going to be your local astronomy club. I've learned more from talking to people here than any book you can ever buy, and that's the truth. We have, with us in the room a couple astrophotographers in the room. I've learned from these people how to do astrophotography. I have a book at home, but some of the stuff that when you're actually out here is, you know, you can't pay for it. So Backyard Astronomy's Guide by Terrence Dickerson. That's where I pulled a lot of the pages from. We talked about. I talked about Turn Left at Orion. I love that. I put Cloudy Nights up here. I know people are gonna question me. There's an online forum that we all go on. It's called Cloudy Nights. It's kind of a play on words. It's a place that all the astronomy people can go when it's cloudy when you're online. You can ask questions to these people. You might not get the right answer. I can find it helpful at sometimes. Gear is there's a really good gear trading and buying gear from people online. I've done it through Cloudy Nights. Things to watch. There's a really, really cool star hopping guide if you want to learn more about how, to find things in the night sky. Kissimmee Park Observatory, which is actually in Florida, puts out these videos, and they do a lot of the more popular objects, and they tell you how to star hop to them. Sometimes I'll watch the videos before I'm coming out here to kind of get an idea of, how I can find these things. Ed Ting is a cool guy. He talks about gear and telescopes a lot, but it's a good, introductory channel to watch on YouTube if you want to get more information. And then Astronomy Talks from here. You can go online and you can watch some of the past Astronomy Talks. I think the most useful thing in my journey has been coming out here and kind of talking with people. I think that's it.
All right. Thank you, Michael. So, we are going to be doing a question and answer session. So, for the people online, you have it easy. You just type your question like you have been all along. Can't get much simpler. And we do have the lights on, so I can actually see we have people, so you don't have to wave out about your arm like it's about to fall off, because I can actually see. We already covered at the beginning during the safety briefing. We're not shining flashlights in people's eyes. Um, so you would just raise your hand and question. So we're going to start out with an online question. And the first online question is, you had mentioned you are in real estate.
Okay.
If you were ever to buy a piece of property and you were going to make your dream observatory,
Okay.
where would that be?
Arizona. I've been to Arizona a couple times. Actually, we were in Arizona in the Sedona area. Actually, it's kind of a funny story. We did a stargazing tour in Arizona, and one of the things that we talked about is expectations when we have these telescopes. So we booked this tour in Arizona. It was freezing that night. It was like 20 degrees. We went out in the middle of the desert, and I was blown away by what I could see. It was a very dark sky. It was awesome. The people that I were with were just like, "Is that it? Like that's all we're seeing?" A lot of the things that we looked at were these deep sky objects. I was kind of nerding out a little bit. Arizona would be kind of a cool place. I've always thought about maybe California. Like I mentioned, I like to rock climb, so there's a lot of cool rock climbing destinations. We were in Joshua Tree, not too long ago. Really, really nice spot. A lot of people do a lot of you know astronomy stuff there, but excellent rock climbing. So
Yeah. Oddly enough, the desert, there's not plants. The plants hold the heat in. In the desert, there's no plants, and therefore the heat, it gets really hot during the day because you're cooking on like a very solar reactive surface, and then at night you're like all of it goes away.
yeah,
So
it was it
you
was
think, oh, Arizona really warm. No, you get both extremes in one day.
Yeah, we were out there. We were looking through a 14-inch cat, big scope, and it was an awesome experience. But again, some of these people, I don't, they didn't want to be out there when it was 20 degrees. We talked about site and location. That may be a poor one for someone. You don't want to be somewhere with no bathroom and it's 20 degrees and you're out in the middle of nowhere. I loved it. I could have stayed out there for hours, but I wasn't lugging my scope on the plane, so we had to do that.
All right. Any questions out here? Perfect.
If you could only have one telescope, what would it be and why?
Okay. Um, Get binoculars. So Dan gave a very good talk about. This is like the third time I said it. He gave a very good talk last week about telescopes. It's a minefield. There's many different telescopes you can get. You can get a telescope for $30,000 if you really want to and go nuts. I love my Dobsonian. It's an 8-inch Dobsonian. It's really cool because if you're a beginner, you can put your cell phone on it and it kind of guides you through the night sky. It's just enough aperture that I can see really cool like dark sky stuff without like me having to be a bodybuilder to move it. So that's cool. It's so easy to set up. I could literally pull it out of my car and be ready to observe in 10 minutes. If I have to let it cool down, but that we'll talk about that. But I love my 8-inch stop. What's your favorite telescope, Dan? The 6-inch stop, yeah. People really like the Dobsonian. The guy who invented the Dobsonian, I think his name was his name was Job Dobsonian or Dobson. He came up with the design of the Dobsonian for people like us who want to get more into the hobby. Before back in the day, they used to get like people used to build their own telescopes. That's the main way that people would get into observing. So the Dob and the Dobsonian style telescope I really love. So.
All right. So our next online question is: was there a particular reason you wanted a new telescope instead of the free used one you've received?
The one that was being offered to me is I mentioned Ed Ting, and if you watch his talks, he talks about these department store telescopes. I don't want to rag on the person who was going to give it to me, but it was like $100. It wasn't what you wanted. The only place where that telescope belonged was in the garbage. So, um, it just wasn't a great telescope. I think one of the mistakes that I made, not mistakes that I made, but I think I jumped into getting the first telescope, which was the 90-inch Mac, a little bit early. So I bought the 90-inch Mac, and then I bought my Dobsonian like 2 months later. So the bill from Celestron was high. I that's why I think I recommended, kind of getting a little bit more information about what you want to see in the night sky before you get out and you make a purchase. So
And that's where your local astronomy club comes in play, because usually they have a variety of telescopes, and if the club doesn't, there's a number of people in the club who probably have all different sort of setups. So, and a lot of them are willing to let you look through your scope, tell you all their pet peeves about, okay, if when I set it up, if I put this stuffed animal right here on the tripod,
yeah,
everything will work perfectly in my astrophotography setup. And when it starts misbehaving, you just wave the stuffed wizard around it. The equipment really likes that. Um, People get interesting with their equipment.
my
So,
my Dov for a very long time had painter's tape holding the whole thing up. I'm not even kidding. I just recently pervaded. I recently just took out the bolts like and did some sort of modifications to it, but it worked. The painter's tape, it worked. So people do crazy stuff.
all right, another question, all the way in the back.
Hi, Michael.
Hello?
What do you consider your with star hopping
Yeah.
your biggest star hopping success? Because sometimes you can spend a good portion of the night searching for something.
Yeah.
And what would you consider your biggest star hopping
For
success?
some reason, I knew someone was going to ask this question, and I came with an answer. I was actually one of the nights that we were out here, and it was a very cold night. It was M33, Triangulum. It's a very, very, it's an object that, so Triangulum is a constellation, and it's also a galaxy. The constellation isn't the easiest to find. It's kind of this weird, just this little triangle, but the actual object is very, very dim. So I remember just like slewing around that part of the sky, and I'm like, I know it's supposed to be here, but I don't see anything. And that was like a couple weeks of doing that. And like finally I was out here, and I remember I'm like, oh, like I think I finally got it. And you can kind of see like the little like galaxy. M33 was a good one. M1 is a good one, Crab Nebula. That's like a really, really like a I don't know. It's hard to spot. It's not very bright. M33. I remember like 2 or 3 sessions being like, all right, I'm gonna find this thing. Like I'm not gonna use the phone. I want to sit down and do it. So very good question.
All right, so I have 2 yes or no questions online, and then I'll actually get to one that involves some brain.
Okay.
Is they're talking about the picture you showed of the North American nebula that you took? Is that the picture you submitted to the UACNJ calendar last year?
I hear another shameless plug.
Yes, this is a shameless plug.
Wait, are you talking about the calendar that you can purchase from us?
Why, yes.
Yeah, so I think what Kim is alluding to is we're all sending our pictures in for the calendar this year, and the 2025 one is coming out. So all of my friends have that same calendar on their fridges. So it's yes, but yeah, it was in the calendar.
Okay, the next yes or no question. Did you get good pics of the aurora when it was down here?
No, I didn't. I I should have taken the opportunity even to go a little bit more north, because I know like you could probably have gotten somewhere dark, like even upstate New York, and I just, I was busy that night. I don't know what I was doing, but I should have been out here, but I didn't.
All right, so the question that actually involves some thought. How do you know what the right coloring for an object is?
Ooh, so like photography wise,
Yes, so you said it involves some editing and color correction and whatnot.
the answer is there's no right anything. um, Actually, it's funny we're talking about North American Nebula. One of the members here just showed me his picture or image of the North American Nebula. His was blue. Mine was red. There's different sort of gases and different sort of stuff that the camera's picking out. And when you're on the computer, kind of doing like the processing, a lot of the astrophotographer choose what you want to see. So you can, huge saturation and huge stuff, and the image kind of looks like this weird blob thing. A lot of the colors that you see, and correct me if I'm wrong, you see a lot of reds, you see a lot of greens. They coincide with different oh my god, what am I thinking
Elements.
of? Elements, yeah, different elements. Yeah, I think red is oxygen. Red is oxygen. Somewhere. Hydrogen. There we go. I knew people would know this. I told you I wasn't an expert. But yeah, there's no right answer. It's what looks good to you. A lot of art involved. So.
All right. Was there another question here? Just raise your hand because
Hello. On
So
the topic of editing,
yes,
is there a specific software that people use, or
I
can someone who's novice
I could
use
give another talk right
Lightroom
now for an hour
or
about
Photoshop?
that.
What do you like to use?
I use PixInsight. PixInsight is something that is used by astrophotographers because it's very good. People say it's very confusing to learn. It can be very confusing to learn. I like PixInsight because I feel that certain processes within the application can be very powerful. Once you kind of get familiar with using it, I think you get really like grade A, stuff out of PixInsight. So what I'll do is, without getting too much into astrophotography, what we do is we take sub exposures. So it's actually tons of different photos over the night that we stack together.
Mm.
So I'll use a free service called Deep Sky Stacker. I'll stack all of them together. I'll throw it in PixInsight. I'll do my editing, and then I'll actually use Lightroom as like a final sort of like pass through just to get like tweak the colors a little bit. I'll put it on Instagram. I'll get 14 likes for my 2 days of work, and I'll be happy. But I like PixInsight. There's a couple other different ones that people use. People use Photoshop. Um,
all right. So our next online question: are there any land-based visual telescopes where you could see the flag on the moon?
I don't think so. Probably.
I also don't know the answer,
So
but it is a good question.
Um, if people want to learn a lot about cool stuff that you can do with imaging, there's a documentary about how this team of scientists actually got an image of a black hole, and the way they did it is they synced up telescopes from like different parts of the world. So if they can do that, maybe anything is possible, but I don't know of any telescope that we can get, that good of a picture into the moon.
Yeah, that was actually by spacing out the different radio telescopes. It wasn't a visual telescope.
Yes,
It
we
was a
talked
bunch
about
of
this.
radio telescopes, gathered all the data, and then did weird math programming stuff
Yeah.
to output to
Some
a
say the moon
visual
landing was fake,
image.
so I don't know. Depends who you ask.
All right, so our next online question is: have you ever considered making your own telescope?
Yes, and I quickly unconsidered it. um, yeah, there's a fun convention or a fun, is it a convention? Stellafane, which that happens in Vermont, where it's a bunch of people that go up there and they make their own telescopes.
Astronomy retreat,
Yeah.
convention.
I don't know. The when we talk about telescopes, one of the things that's the most important part of the telescope building is the mirror. So you actually have to grind the mirror. I read this good book, and it was about the women in Harvard University, Glass Universe, and they were talking about building telescopes. They wanted to take this telescope, they wanted to go up to the Andes, and they wanted to do some observing. So it was funny because they got the piece of glass in France, and it took like a year and a half for them to like make the glass. So they sent the payment over, and they sent a letter. They're like, "Hey, where's our glass?" And they, maybe 6 months later, "Hey, like we paid for it. Where is it?" So after reading that, I was like, you know what? I'll just buy it.
Oddly enough, it takes a while to do it correctly.
Yeah.
And because after grinding, you also have smoothing and polishing and then coating.
Yeah.
So, which is why a lot of people now take advantage of the cell phones that we didn't or that didn't exist back then and go progress pic. Clink.
Yeah.
So you could see stuff's going on.
Yeah, the Dobbs, I've seen like homemade like Dobsonian bases before that like aren't like the craziest thing. The mirror, yeah, the mirror is the tough one. So maybe convince my fiance for me to do that. Yeah.
I mean,
you gotta convince her.
what you need to do is take that garage sale free one that you got,
There you go.
3D print the housing, redo the calculations, like
Don't give me any ideas.
all right, question out here. Bueller. All right, so our next online question: could you use a telescope to expose like a film strip or like a sheet of cyanotype and come out with like the image of a moon using a telescope?
Okay, so this is something I don't know a ton about, but I know astrophotography, and someone in this room has to know something about this. Used to be done with film, right? So I don't know too much about that process because what I'm using to do the astrophotography is I'm obviously using cameras. I know when we talked about the glass universe, they used to use glass plates, which was kind of the same thing. They used to have these glass plates that they
It,
would store and
it's
observe from.
gotta be possible. You will likely need to do some math.
I don't know.
You would need to have a bright enough object, A. Uh, so moon would be appropriate. And you would need to basically project the image of the moon onto.
Yeah.
So possible, but there's gonna be some math.
Yeah, I'm not smart
And
enough to
math
figure
is
that
evil.
out. Maybe someone did that, but it's not gonna be me. So
I'd love to if someone ever does that online, go drop those pics in and X how to guide in our Discord channel because I'd honestly love to learn about that.
Hi.
hello.
What's next on your list to find in the night sky? I know we can't see the whole sky from this location, so if you had to travel somewhere to find something, what would you be interested in looking at?
Good question, lady in the front. I would love to see some of the stuff in the southern hemisphere. So when we talk about hemispheres of visual observing, good point. If you go below the equator, it's actually a completely different sky. So some people, I have never been observing down there, but some people in this club have been to Florida, and you can kind of see some of these images that you can't see at from this location. But according to the things I've read and the people that I've talked to, the southern hemisphere observing is like way better than the northern hemisphere. I don't know. I've never been down there. Um, I know Australia is like a big hotspot for astronomy. Again, it's another dry place where not a lot of people live in the middle of the country. So
Yeah, I think there's overall less population and less highly populated just swaths of light pollution.
yeah,
Uh
the people who I've talked to who from the north, they like went to the southern hemisphere and they were like, "What is this?" Like, because the sky is completely different. So they had to kind of get their sea legs a little bit, and they're a little bit confused. So
right. Chat's being a joker. Do you like Saturn enough where you would put another ring on it?
oh, okay. I'm only okay. I'm only buying one ring in my life, and that's and that's it.
All right, another question out here. All right, so our next online question is there a diminishing return as you go up in aperture? Are
Um,
you going to eventually just have such a big thing that I don't know why I did this, it wasn't worth it?
so yeah, I've I've did a lot of research when I bought my 8-inch Dobsonian, and there can be a lot of diminishing returns when it comes to size of stuff, because of things that I talked about, right? I live in an apartment. I can't have an 18-inch telescope, right? I just can't have it. I heard that like the 8 and the sort of 10 range in terms of aperture is kind of the sweet spot when you want to go up and move stuff around. When I went from the 90 millimeter, which I think is like 2.5 inches or 3 inches, to the 8, that was a big jump up. But when I come to here, Jenny's jump, some of the stuff that you see with like the 14 and the bigger scopes is incredible. I think it can get a little bit nuanced when you talk about huge aperture, but unfortunately tonight is cloudy. If people, the public get a chance to come out here, I would recommend going and see those bigger telescopes. I don't know if I answered the question, but
Right. So, people here, if you have a question, raise your hand. I'm just gonna start kind of powering through our online questions, unless you guys come up with a question. Online people do get your questions in because I do know we're coming to the end of them. Um, why use a star atlas instead of like an app?
good question. Anytime that you're using the phone when you're observing, you always have the chance that your eyes are gonna see, white light. And when we talk about observing, you always want, your eyes to be dark adapted. So I try to not pick up my phone a lot. I know the Celestron app has like a red mode, which is a little bit better. I also find the experience with anything that I can mount on the telescope to be a little bit more, or something that I could look at that's not my phone is a little bit enjoyable. You know, you have your phone, you have this big telescope that you're trying to slew around, and then you have this phone that you're trying to like slew around. It can get kind of awkward. I like the Star Atlases. I don't know, maybe I'm old school. I like to have the print thing in front of me. I like to be able to flip through it and see what's there. I don't like to touch my phone when I'm outside. So
Yeah, having your phone open, I monitor chat is often why I tell people when we're outside, you have to kind of wave your hand about because I have no night vision.
Yeah.
Absolutely none.
yeah,
Uh,
also I'm trying to get away from all the phone stuff when I'm out here, you know? Yeah. It's bigger. Yeah. Yeah, I can look at like much larger stuff, and some of the actual physical atlases I think are pretty big, like the actual like prints of them. It's a lot easier to look at. I like having it on the table. It's preference.
right. Next online question. Would you eventually move to somewhere with less light pollution?
I would love to quit my job and just move to the desert and rock climb and do astronomy. I think what's fortunate is I think where I live, which is New York City, I'm only like on a good day I'm about an hour and 15, maybe an hour half to here. And I think like I've been to like dark places. I don't want to say there's diminishing returns because when you're in the middle of Arizona desert, it's awesome. But like this is really really good, I think. I mean, I'm a huge fan of this place when I found it, back in the day. So I think getting to somewhere like this
Back
would
in
like
the day,
back
all
in the
two
day too,
years
yeah,
ago.
yeah, back 2 years ago. Um, I don't want to have to travel, more than that, and picking my whole life and moving it out to somewhere else. I don't know. It's a big ask.
All right, questions. All right, so our like I said, last call for questions for our online chat. I'd like to give you guys a little bit, just because stream delay. By the time we've asked and answered a question, they've finally received it. Um, are there? Let's see. Are there any tips for what type of eyepiece you should start with when trying to locate an object?
Um, weird. Weird.
I think I know where they're going with this. So, a lot of your starter scopes come with like one or two eyepieces. Um, a lot of people will go, "Oh, let's start at the low end, so like a 9 millimeter." You want to start at the higher number because that gives you higher number, more area. So you find kind of go, okay, this is the general area of sky I want to look at, and you kind of center where your object should be,
Okay.
and then you pick up your next lower eyepiece and slowly zoom your way into.
Yeah. I guess they're talking about magnification. Yeah.
Yes.
So
So like if you have a 9 millimeter, a 12 millimeter, and a 32 millimeter,
yeah.
you're gonna want to start at 32.
So when I do my star hopping and when I do my observing, I use like what would be considered a medium power, and the reason for that is because I'm lazy. I think with the medium powered eyepiece, it's like enough detail where I don't have to like put more power on it, but I can still find stuff. Keep in mind when also you start putting more power on stuff, things start to like get a little bit more fuzzy. When someone is star hopping or when they're visual observing, it's always recommended that they start at the lowest possible, magnification, because it's easier.
which is the highest possible number.
Which is the highest possible number. It's a little bit confusing. So when you buy a starter telescope, or a beginner telescope, a lot of the times they'll come with like a 25 millimeter Plössl, like the regular like 25 ones.
I picked three numbers that sounded good in my head.
I think you
So-
could, like whenever I've bought anything, it comes with that one. And that's good. That's a good place to start. I go medium because I'm lazy and I don't feel like switching them out. So I'm like I'm happy here. So
But yeah, definitely. The way I remember it is the higher the number, the more stars I can see in that view,
yeah.
which may or may not help. So start high number, work your way to your
People-
low number as you kind of zoom in, and eventually you might have to zoom back out because, like you said, it gets blurry.
Yeah. So I think when you have a lot of the products that are geared towards beginners, what you see is like, oh my God, you can see 7,000 times magnification. It's you're not going to see anything out of the seven, you know. So that the more magnification, the more power you put on it, isn't necessarily doing yourself justice. So I don't know.
Get yourself the scope that's easy to set up and has the most options.
Yeah.
And also wait to buy a scope. Don't be like, I gotta get a scope. Look at scopes,
You can.
work with some scopes, and then buy a scope. Right. And our online chat also had answered the previous question about there is no Earth-based visual telescopes that can see the flag on the moon.
Okay.
And
What about like,
someone also checked with Google, and it says not even the Hubble, if that's where you're going.
okay, maybe Mars, maybe there's some Martians who have really awesome stuff, and they're like, yeah, we could see all this stuff, but I guess not. Okay, can't see it.
All right. Any last minute questions? Perfect. So thank you once again for a great talk, Michael. Thank you guys for joining us here and online. For the guys here, do be careful when you go out. It has been raining quite a lot. It is very clouded over. I don't think we have any telescopes open because we prefer not to have the telescopes rained on and then broken because of the rain. So everyone, clearer skies than we've had the last 2 times, and good seeing. Have a good night.